We kept seeing the same photograph. A Navy airship over Manhattan, tied by its nose to the top of the Empire State Building. Proof, people say, that the tallest tower in the world was a docking station for Zeppelins. The internet is full of it. So we checked. No airship ever docked there. The photograph is a fake. And that mast is still bolted to the top of the building today, for a reason almost nobody remembers. So we went looking for what that mast was for, what happened the day they tried it, and how a crew raised it in 410 days. Start with what the public was told. In the winter of 1929, the man running the project, former New York Governor Al Smith, stood in front of reporters and announced that the building would grow. Another 200 feet would go on top, and that new height would not be for offices or observation. It would be a mooring mast. Dirigibles crossing the Atlantic would nose up to the tip of the tower, tie on, and hold there while passengers walked down a gangplank and into an elevator. 7 minutes later, Smith said, those passengers would be standing on 34th Street. It was the future, delivered as a press release. And it was mostly a cover story. A few blocks away, the Chrysler Building had just pulled a trick of its own, hiding a steel spire inside its shell and raising it at the last minute to steal the title of world's tallest. The Empire State needed height to win, and it needed a reason to add that height that sounded like progress instead of ego. A landing pad for airships was that reason. Christopher Gray, the architectural writer for the New York Times, put it plainly decades later. The mast disguised a quest for bragging rights that it seemed indecent to admit out loud. There was just one group of people who knew the plan would never work, and they were the ones who actually flew airships. The most respected of them was Hugo Eckener, the German commander of the Graf Zeppelin, and the man who had flown a rigid airship around the world. Eckener looked at the idea of tying an 800-foot ship to the top of a skyscraper and called it impractical. The air over a city, he explained, is irregular and spotty. It rolls off rooftops and shoots up the sides of tall buildings in gusts you cannot predict. A ship tethered by its nose to a fixed point that high up would not sit still. It would swing. It would be in constant danger of veering off, with nothing beneath it but 1,000 feet of open air and the rooftops of Midtown Manhattan. And there was a second problem nobody had solved. Even if the ship could hold, how do you walk passengers off the front of a dirigible that is pitching in the wind, across a narrow gangway, a quarter of a mile above the street? The honest answer was that you could not. The machinery to winch a ship down and hold it steady was never even installed on the mast. They tried anyway. In September of 1931, a small private dirigible approached the mast in a wind blowing at 40 miles per hour and managed to hold on by its nose for about 3 minutes before it had to let go. Nobody got on. Nobody got off. 3 minutes, and that was the triumph. 2 weeks later, the Goodyear blimp Columbia came back for a second attempt, and this one was played for the cameras. The blimp could not dock either, so instead it hovered above the mast and lowered a bundle of newspapers on a rope about 100 feet long, down to a man waiting on the tower. The next day, the Columbia tried to make it look official by picking up a stack of mail. A photographer with the Library of Congress caught the moment it went wrong. The rope tore out of the man's hands before he could hook the mailbags on. So a movie cameraman did what movie cameramen do. He staged it. They reset, ran the pickup again for the newsreel, and that footage went out to theaters as proof that the Empire State Building was now an airport in the sky. Later that year, a Navy blimp made one more approach at a newsreel company's request, in wind blowing at 30 miles per hour that the crew called treacherous, and then everyone quietly stopped trying. A 3-minute tether, a bundle of newspapers, and a scene shot for the cameras. That is the entire history of airships docking at the Empire State Building. Which brings us back to the photograph. The one of the Navy airship moored cleanly to the spire, with the city spread out below. It is a striking image, and it is not real. It was put together in 1930 by a news photo agency. A picture of an airship dropped onto a picture of the building, printed and passed around before the mast had ever even been tested. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, which holds a print of it, says so directly. No airship ever docked there, and the mast itself was a publicity stunt. So the mooring mast failed at the one job it was sold to the public to do. But the story does not end with a useless spike on top of a skyscraper. Within a few years, the tower found the mast a real purpose. Radio antennas went up first, and then television. That spire, the one built for Zeppelins that never came, became the broadcast mast for New York City, and the base of the antenna that is still up there today. The stunt turned into the part of the building that ended up mattering most. So that is the myth. Now here is what should be far more impressive than a docking station that never worked, and it almost never gets told. Forget the airships for a second, and look at the mast itself. A steel spire standing 1,250 feet over Manhattan. Someone had to put it there. And they did it, foundation to flagpole, in a little over a year, in the middle of the worst economic collapse in American history. To see how, you have to start at the bottom, with a hole in the ground on Fifth Avenue and a hotel that used to stand in it. Before the Empire State Building, that corner of Fifth Avenue and 34th Street held the original Waldorf Astoria, the most famous hotel in the world. It closed in the spring of 1929, and that fall, the wreckers moved in. Tearing down a building that size creates a mountain of debris, and the crews had to put it somewhere. According to John Toranek, the historian who wrote the definitive account of the tower, the granite, the bronze, and everything else there was no market for, was loaded onto barges, hauled out past the harbor, and dumped into the Atlantic Ocean off Sandy Hook, New Jersey. The grand old hotel did not go to a landfill. It went to the bottom of the sea. And with the site cleared, the excavation began in January of 1930. 2 shifts of about 300 men each, working around the clock, dug down to the bedrock that holds the island of Manhattan together, the hard schist the whole tower would stand on. None of what came next happened by accident. The building was run by a contractor called Starrett Brothers and Eakin, working from a design by the architects Shreve, Lamb, and Harmon. And their real innovation was not a machine at all. It was scheduling. They treated the tower like an assembly line running straight up into the sky. Steel was ordered, cut, and stamped for an exact spot in the frame, then trucked to the site and hoisted into place sometimes within days of arriving, because there was no room anywhere in Midtown to store it. Trucks pulled up, cranes lifted the beams off, and they went straight into the building. Deliveries were timed to the hour. Every trade followed close behind the one in front of it, so that riveters were working a few floors below the derricks, while, lower down, other crews were already laying floors and running pipe. The whole tower rose as one continuous operation that never stopped moving. Then came the steel, and this is where the real machine story lives. The frame of the Empire State Building swallowed 57,000 tons of structural steel. To put that in scale, the Chrysler Building down the road used 21,000. Getting that much steel up into the air, faster and higher as the building climbed, meant the derricks lifting it could not stay on the ground. So the engineers did something clever. They mounted the lifting derricks, guy derricks with booms 75 feet long, on platforms bolted to the rising steel itself. As the frame went up, the derricks were dismantled and remounted higher, leapfrogging up the building floor by floor so their cables could always reach the next tier of beams waiting to be set. 9 of them worked the tower, and when the upper setbacks narrowed the profile, the 4 smaller ones came down, and the 5 strongest kept climbing. And once the steel reached a floor, the material still had to move sideways across it. So the site ran its own miniature railroad. A narrow-gauge track was laid on the working floors, and small carts rolled brick, block, and tile from the hoists to wherever the crews needed them. A construction site with its own working railway, climbing a little higher every week. If you are the kind of person who would rather have the real story than the myth, take a second and subscribe. We dig one of these out of the record every week. Now back up on the steel to the part that terrified everyone watching from the street. What terrified them was the riveting. The steel frame was not welded together. It was riveted, and the way that was done in 1930 looks insane by any modern standard. The work ran in gangs, 38 of them across the site. In each gang, one man heated a rivet in a small coal forge until it glowed, then threw it, a red-hot piece of steel arcing through the air, sometimes across a gap of 50 feet, to another man who caught it in a metal can. He dropped it into a hole in the beams, and 2 more men hammered it flat with pneumatic guns before it cooled. All of this on open steel, hundreds of feet up, with no net, and nothing beneath them but the street. At full speed, the crews were putting up a floor a day. You will read that the building took 3.5 million rivets, and that number gets repeated everywhere. We went looking for where it comes from, and the honest answer is that no one actually has a verified count. So we are not going to hand you a number nobody can stand behind. What we can tell you is that it was hundreds of thousands of them, and every single one was heated, thrown, caught, and driven by hand in the open air. Put the whole thing on a calendar, and it stops feeling impossible. The wreckers finished with the old hotel, and excavation started in January of 1930. The steel frame began going up that spring, and it climbed at a pace of about a story a day, topping out that September, roughly 23 weeks of steel. On April 11th, 1931, Smith drove a final rivet, a gold one, and the structure was done. Count it from the first column to that last rivet, and you get 410 days. Count it from the day they broke ground to the day the doors opened, on May 1st, 1931, and it is 1 year and 45 days. A 102-story building, the tallest on the planet. Foundation to flagpole in a little over a year, using derricks, forges, and men throwing hot steel to each other in the sky. It is worth sitting with that for a second, because 100 years later, with computers and tower cranes and every modern tool, a building a fraction of that height can spend more time tied up in permits and hearings than the entire Empire State Building took to design and build. They did not have better equipment. They had a deadline, a plan, and nothing in their way. Which raises the question everyone asks about a job like this. How many men died building it? The internet has answers, and most of them are wrong. You will see claims of dozens of deaths, of hundreds, of a tower raised on blood. Here is what the record actually shows. In 1930, the grim rule of thumb in the trade was that a big project cost about 1 life for every $1 million spent. The Empire State Building cost roughly $41 million. By that expectation, it should have killed around 41 men. The official count was 5. Some careful histories put it at 6, with names and dates attached. Either way, on a tower a quarter of a mile tall, built by men with no hard hats, no harnesses, and no safety nets, almost nobody died. That is not a dark secret. It is the opposite. It was one of the safest big builds of its entire era, and the fact that it gets sold online as a slaughterhouse tells you more about how the internet works than about how the building went up. And while we are correcting the record, there is one more photograph worth clearing up, because it gets tied to this building constantly. You know the one. 11 workmen in flat caps, sitting shoulder to shoulder on a steel beam, eating lunch with their boots dangling over the city. People label it the Empire State Building all the time. We checked that, too. It is not. That photo was taken in 1932, 2 years later and a mile north, during the construction of the RCA building at Rockefeller Center. It was a staged publicity shot, arranged to sell the new development, and to this day, nobody is even certain which photographer took it. A famous picture of the wrong building, pinned to this one for so long that the mistake feels like a fact. There is one more machine without which none of it would have worked, and it is the one people forget. A 102-story building is useless if nobody can reach the top of it. That job fell to the elevators, 58 of them from the Otis Company, threaded through the core of the tower. They were built to run faster than the law allowed. New York City capped elevator speed at 700 feet per minute, so the fastest cars were held back until Smith pushed the city to change the rule. And then, having built the tallest, fastest, most modern office tower on Earth, ahead of schedule and well under its $50 million budget, the building itself coming in around $24 million, the owners ran into the one thing no machine could fix. It was 1931. The country was in the Depression, and almost nobody could afford the space. On opening day, less than a quarter of the building was leased. For years, the upper floors sat dark, and New Yorkers gave it a nickname that stuck: the Empty State Building. It stayed afloat in part on tourists, people paying $1 each to ride those fast elevators up to the observation deck and look out over the city, which in some years brought in about as much as the rent did. Which is the strange thing about the Empire State Building. Almost everything the internet repeats about it is a little bit wrong, and the real version is stranger and better. The airships never came, but the mast built for them is still up there, doing the job it was never designed for, holding the antennas over the city. The last of the original 1931 Otis elevators kept running until 2017, when it was finally retired into the building's own museum. In 1945, a B-25 bomber lost in the fog flew straight into the 79th floor, and the building was open for business 2 days later. A young elevator operator named Betty Lou Oliver survived a fall of 75 stories inside one of those shafts that same day, and still holds the world record for it. The building keeps outliving its own myths, standing there with the receipts, waiting for someone to actually check. If you want to see what we found buried under another American landmark, watch the one we made on the 89 bulldozers the internet swears were abandoned at Hoover Dam. There are more of these buried in the record, and we go looking for them every week. We will see you in the next one now.